Mr. William Dixon. Oh, hang on, wait, Dixon. Hello, I'm here to talk about activism. Yesterday there were a lot of questions about what we can be doing now. I'm going to try and address that. Just to introduce myself briefly, my name's William. I've been with the movement for some time. I have a history of working with young, homeless and disadvantaged people. I've been doing this for about 10 years now, predominantly in Portsmouth where I live. This has been through various charities and local government, so I'm very concerned with issues of poverty, social injustice and inequality. My pursuit of this is no doubt what led me to the Zeitgeist Movement. I'm also about to graduate with a sociology degree. Not that graduation is important, but the sociological approach is worth noting, as it is largely the approach I use today. In a nutshell, it's very similar to systems theory, and that to understand one particular trouble or concern, you have to understand the wider context or issue in which that exists. We'll talk about that later, but it will nonetheless be from a semi-social science perspective, albeit hopefully in a language we can all understand. As we go, I will ask some questions. Please respond as quick as you can, because we're a bit short for time, but I'm keen to collect some evidence as we go along. This is to check I'm on course and making sense, and also that you haven't fallen asleep. Do have a look around the room when we do this. Don't take my word for anything. Turn around and see how everybody else responds collectively. So, I'm here to talk about and promote activism for the movement. I hope to address the question of what to do now. Can you see the slides all right? Is that all right? My presentation is called Activism 2.0, simply because I spoke on activism last year, and today is to be seen as a continuation of that. So shortly I'll recap on last year. After that I'll move on to something new that I hope will help you all move forward and leave today with something tangible you can all do to make this happen. It is important to highlight last year's message though. As we're in a room nearly 4 times the size, I can assume most of you didn't see it, and as a starting point for activism it is worth revisiting. I will start as I did last year by asking how many activists do we have here today? Can you put a hand up? Quite a few, shit. That's probably less than half though, that's probably about a quarter of the room I think now. Okay, I've got a lot to do. As with last year also, I want to start off by showing you some data, a graph. This graph shows the movement's membership growth since we met this time last year. We're not too concerned about the actual numbers, these just represent who has formally clicked and joined through the main site. I know that the awareness of the movement goes much further than that. Can I ask though, just to find out who's included in that, how many people have actually joined the movement through the main site? Okay, so that's probably only about half again, isn't it? So that's wildly inaccurate basically, but we're just using it as an indicator. What I want to draw your attention to, and being bright sparks, no doubt you've already noticed, is that the movement has continual growth all year. You can see a spike at the top end there, that was where the film was released and it went viral, so that clearly works, but I can't get you all to make a film of that standard. I think Peter's particularly good at doing that. The growth rate over the whole year is 22%. What's more important though is that there are no periods whatsoever of stagnation or decline. We're moving in one direction and we're growing and we're getting bigger. I aim to try and explain this growth to show you what's happening here. If as activists we can understand how this growth occurs, if we can understand the process by which a movement gains support, then we can use it to our advantage. This is about applying the scientific method. If we're looking at gaining critical mass, this is what we need to focus on. Phase 1. So let's get started. What is activism, and importantly, who are the activists? Last year I approached this question by looking at what I had done, which is no doubt why I get asked to talk on it. After joining the movement, my first piece of activism I took part in was the G20 protest in April 2009. This march was in central London. There were several, but this one leading on to the Bank of England. Protesters from various English organisations were invited, and to put a voice across, I made some Zeitgeist banners, wore a t-shirt and marched with everyone else. I did manage to speak to a few small journalists discussing the movement, but I've never seen any stories since. And anyway, as often with protests, they descended into anarchy and nothing much was achieved. The second piece, and perhaps more substantive piece of activism I engaged in, was the One Another project in August 2009. People from London might have seen it. The One Another project was intended to be a living piece of art, presenting as a cross-section of society. Individuals were invited to apply for a ballot to gain a 1-hour slot standing on the 4th plinth in London's Trafalgar Square. It was to be streamed globally and also the basis of a weekly television show on Sky Arts, in which the best performances were reviewed. There is also a book on sale overviewing the project and its participants with images and writings by several social commentators. We, the movement, manage the whole page. Just an image, however, no words, so don't rush out and buy it. The plan was to inflate a giant balloon and turn it into an earth, then attach a sign to it with the zeitgeistmovement.com to it, and to release it over the London horizon for everyone to see. Meanwhile, I'll be saying something profound and relevant. Needless to say, the balloon burst. So did my balloon. My balloon burst too. It all went slightly pear-shaped, but it's something. Apparently the book's going to individuals and libraries all over the world, so a presence in there is good. Currently, as you'd expect, I've taken the opportunity to use university as a site for activism. I'm currently working on a dissertation called A Zeitgeist Movement, Exploring Global Consciousness Through Collective Action. Other pieces of activism include the usual DVD distribution, little things like changing wireless network names. Ooh, there you go, I'm going too fast. And importantly, talking to people every day, connecting with people in any way possible, individuals or groups like yourselves. I hope that if people took anything away with them last year, it was that activism isn't something you go and do occasionally. Likewise, there is no one way to do it. Activism is seen as communicating, doing it your way. In your world, it is a way of being. Whatever you're doing, do it with purpose. Now, not to sell myself short, and hopefully you'll still have me back, but often the bigger and more thought-out pieces of activism I've attempted have been relatively ineffectual. They're good as part of a wider repertoire, but you have to question what really works. So let's do that. Now, being honest, and don't worry about my feelings, who is here because they saw me stand on a plinth or wave a banner at the G20 protest? Put your hand up. Oh, fuck it. Okay, put your hand up if you've never seen me before in your life. Okay. Taxi. Right. Now, who is here because someone else told them about the idea? Perhaps introduced them to the films and discussed its message. Put your hand up if that's the case. Okay. Put your hand up if the person that introduced you to the movement was a complete stranger. Okay, a few. Now put your hand up if it was a friend or someone you knew that introduced you. Okay. I put it to you now, as I did last year, that activism in this era is about communicating. Furthermore, it is not communication of a linear type, i.e. one man or a small group communicating to lots of strangers, but rather activism, as we need to understand it, is lots of people talking to lots of people, people they're connected to. It is about using horizontal communication. How many people here told someone where they were going today and talked about the movement? How many people kept it a secret? So there's a couple, okay. For me, this is activism. It's reaching out to people in your life. Activism isn't a single visit. Our goal isn't achieved through single interactions or demonstrations. It is the product of multiple visits, of ongoing communications, of questions and answers, of shared discovery. It is about talking to people we are connected to, sharing ideas. So I'll ask again, how many activists do we have here today? Worked better last year, okay. So if we look again at this growth, we can start to draw some conclusions. The first thing that explains this growth is you lot. You just didn't know it. You are the activists. A film, a presentation, an idea is nothing on its own. For people to relate to it and identify with it requires delivery by way of communication. Ideas have to spread through people. If they didn't, this room would be empty, just me and an idea. This is often the case, but thankfully not today. This is something you have done. So something else important to say is well done and thank you. But keep it up. The only weight we have as a movement, the only influence, so to speak, is you. As Peter said in a recent interview, I've pinched a few of his quotes, I hope you don't mind. The movement is becoming an amalgam of different circumstances, where the ideas permeate the culture on multiple levels. These are your circumstances and your cultures. You are making the ideas a part of that. This is the zeitgeist beginning to shift, or at a minimum, being challenged. But last year also, I was keen to avoid any technological determinism in my talking. The task is not foregone. Horizontal communication was seen as a tool. It is acknowledged... Whoa, it's acknowledged that I pressed the wrong button. It is acknowledged with tools such as the internet that we can now communicate across any space or time pretty much instantaneously. People are watching this all over the world. But all over the world also, these tools are being used for other purposes. There is a lot of noise out there. Whilst we sit here today in a room 4 times as big, with many more members and supporters than this time last year, time is still not on our side. Last year I used a quote from Peter which nicely summed it up. As I'm short on time, I'll use it again. All indicators point towards self-destruction. Is there any change there? He's talking. As we sit here today, the gap between the rich and poor is increasing. Inequality is growing and the problems that are associated with social divisions are increasing. Money continues to be a much ignored source of social divide, and hence the effects continue to grow. More and more people, here and abroad, in developed and developing countries, continue to be denied the basic necessities required for life. People in their millions are dying, millions more are being abused and neglected. To what end? This is a system that benefits the few and has no ultimate purpose. It is completely unsustainable, producing more waste than anything before in our entire history, and it is getting worse. As our leaders cling to outdated models of growth, our resources continue to be exploited, and our society continues to decay. The very things we need to survive, from material provisions to strong social bonds, continue to be strained, cut, withdrawn, or simply denied. In short, my fellow activists, there is work to be done. This shit has got to go. Thank you. That's a brilliant saying, that is. So what new can I tell you? How can I further explain this growth? What I'm about to tell you is not new. As many of us know, we live in the dark ages scientifically, especially with its application, a severe case of cultural lag. Frame analysis is a concept outlined by Erving Goffman. It is a method for studying collective action and one of the main approaches now used for studying social movements in sociology. The main text was published in 1974. Of course, Goffman is picking up on the work of others, but essentially he was concerned with people's different realities and how this drives action. This is not an extreme social science argument that the world is socially constructed in its entirety, but rather that individuals or collectives apply frameworks of understanding when interacting with the world, the objective world. Goffman was concerned with the organisation of experience, how we make sense of and understand the world, which in turn provides the basis for action, individual or collective. The central theme here is that people possess a frame of reference, a way of seeing the world. This will vary from person to person. As you know, we don't all see the world the same. Goffman's book is some 576 pages long. I don't have the time or really feel the need to explain the whole thing. It's not needed. This guy, Albert Cohen, writing before Goffman, put it much clearer. Our beliefs... Oh, hang on. There we go. Our beliefs about what is possible, and what consequences flow from what actions do not necessarily correspond to what is objectively true. The facts never simply stare us in the face. We see them always through a glass, and the glass consists of the interests, preconceptions, stereotypes and values we bring to the situation. This glass is our frame of reference. We don't see the world with our eyes, we see it with our minds. Perhaps an oversimplification, but it makes the points. You can see the picture. Perhaps looking through a window or a box works better for you. Sometimes I find it quite useful to view it as an operating system. Together with your hardware, it enables you to interact with the world. As Cohen highlights, your window, box, mind, glasses, or whatever, consists of several key elements. We're going to briefly focus on 2. Values and beliefs. Just to be clear, beliefs are seen as statements of truth. This includes everything you know, everything you think, everything you believe to be true or believe to be untrue. Values are the importance we assign or don't to things, what we are interested in, what we value or don't. It is a bit like a ranking system for your beliefs. Cohen works on the assumption that all human action is an effort to solve problems, although not always with a negative stance. Essentially, he's getting at the fact that as we go through life, we make choices, even if we are unaware of them, and even if they are influenced, which this would suggest. This perhaps too is an oversimplification, but it concerns choice, action, reflexivity, the navigation of a life. Our actions are based on our understandings, our frame of reference, our values and beliefs about the world. Does that make sense? Are you still awake? Yeah? Okay. As activists, and what I'm leading to, check that out, I made that, is that if we can understand these frames, both ours and those we are communicating with, then we can become more effective in our activism. Linking frames is what we are trying to do. Ooh, there you go. We are trying to establish shared meaning. This is not to say that we are trying to make everybody the same. Please remember that the frame of reference is something you use to see the world. People will always choose to look in different directions, be interested in different things, thus will fill their lives in different ways. Likewise, of course, we will have, and we certainly promote, things in common. It is not so much about the sameness of the frames, but the shared integrity of them. We will come back to this. It is about science as a method to test our accuracy or the level of truth, how well these frames function. Now, moving on. These frames don't just drop out of the sky. We build them over the course of a life. At first, it is done for us. Our caretakers introduce us to the world. We go to school and interact with the world and all that is in it. As in the new film, from in utero and throughout our lives, our experiences teach us about the world, what it all means, what to expect, and how to act. Importantly, sometimes, or often in fact, things happen in life that don't make sense. Our frame, our values and beliefs, no matter how good we think they are, no matter how long we have had them or who gave them to us, sometimes they just can't equate for what is going on. Either that or they accompany a tremendous amount of pain and difficulty as we put up and live with them. As was highlighted in Zeitgeist Addendum, the second in Peter's film series, in a world where 1% of the population owns 40% of the planet's wealth, in a world where 34,000 children die every single day from poverty and preventable diseases, and where 50% of the world's population lives on less than $2 a day, one thing is clear: something is very wrong. I invite you to think about the inconsistencies in your frame. For me, it is the children I see abused, the young adults they become who are blamed and used as scapegoats for their predicaments, accompanied by the frequent images of greed and excess. It is the resultant wasted lives, the continual flow of advertising, as though all we are good for is buying stuff. The lies we are sold, the theft of our heritage and of our future. From here, we can identify what is seen as a tension of frame. Our values and beliefs aren't pairing well with what we experience in the world. For most of us, we value human life and the right to a decent one. Our beliefs, however, what we know to be true, are that these values simply aren't met, let alone pursued with any vigour. People are needlessly dying, and all lives are feeling the strain. Likewise, people who value and pursue money are beginning to see that it does not function as was once told. That is, its continual pursuit is the cause of much divide. Our belief that it will bring us happiness and that money is the access route to a certain quality of life just isn't so for the minority. Of course, some people's belief systems do not require that they make sense in a rational way, hence their frame of reference just continues on as usual. These are self-referential belief systems, people who only talk to themselves, so to speak. But for a lot of people now, especially in a world with so much interconnection, difference and ambiguity, people are looking for answers to the questions they have. Minds are opening all over the world, and as activists we have to use this. When our frame of reference doesn't provide answers for what is actually happening, a change in frame is sought. People start asking questions, they start searching. Is anybody here today as a result of seeking answers? Because something in your frame of reference didn't add up. Your experience of the world, what you were being told and what you thought you knew didn't add up to what you experienced or saw happening. So it's a long question. Wow. Okay. I looked at religion, Christianity mainly because it was dominant in my culture, but also others. Of course, I looked down the individualistic road of needing to work harder or make some change in myself. But that didn't solve the wider issue of others' suffering. Inevitably then, I looked at my fair share of structural discourse, a bit of conspiracy theory and New World Order stuff. Then at uni, the Marx, Durkheim and Weber, all the stuff they throw at you on an undergraduate sociology degree. But these didn't fit either, none of them enough. For me, this was simply because they had all been tried and we were still facing the same problems. As Einstein said, insanity is doing the same thing over again and expecting different results. So we keep looking. Has anybody had a similar experience? Not exactly the same of mine, but you've been looking through things and some things haven't worked and you've moved on and you're here searching for answers. Quite a few, okay. A handy guide to the frames of social movements, something we can use to understand why people choose to use or decide the frames or anything else that addresses a problem. An easy framing method that is applied, as I am in my dissertation, but can also be used for individuals, is that of identity, adversary, goal. Here it is. Identity is simply the identification of a problem. Adversary is who or what they see as causing the problem. And goal is clearly what they feel needs to be done. This is an easy way to frame identity, adversary, goal. How are social movements' values and beliefs orientated around these points? Also, as individuals, we can see how we find our frames aligning with that of a movement. Do we agree with their synopsis of identity, adversary, goal, or just some? Our identity, or the problem we identify with, in a nutshell, is that people are divided from each other and the planet. Our adversary, the main and as yet unchallenged source of divide is the money market paradigm. And our solution is, 10 points? No one? Resource-based economy, there you go. So how many people here identify with all three? Two? Just one? Okay, so some of you identify with none. That's interesting. Okay. How many does it take to get people on board, I wonder? Does it take all three? Now, looking at these individually, we can see how we relate to some of these, but also importantly, that if all three don't add up, they don't provide a working solution, that the search continues. A bit like a relationship, maybe, any relationship. If there is something we like, perhaps we flirt with the idea for a while. Maybe we spend some time with it. But ultimately, if it's not right, we move on. We keep looking. As I said, I explored religion, and there were some wonderful notions in all of them concerning how we should treat each other. Some of the goals are great, not killing and treating each other well. But besides not sticking to them, the bigger picture didn't add up for me. Last year, I flagged up some research put forward by the Equality Trust. The book The Spirit Level really hit home for me. Using scientific data, they showed exactly what money does by way of causing divide, especially if growth is pursued and divides are increased. As I read the book, I found myself agreeing with most of it. Identity and parts of adversary were good. But then when it came to the goal, what should be done about it, something didn't add up. It was non sequitur. After identifying money as a source of divide, as a cause of much ill health, both between countries and within them, they then suggest ways to try and make money work. For me, it didn't connect. Like last year, this was seen as trying to make racism work or poverty. I don't know why, but to me, there was still something wrong with this picture. Quite a bit slow. Then I found the Zeitgeist Movement. A whole new framework of understanding. Peter identified and articulated the frame initially, but for a movement to occur, for it to be a shared frame of reference, others have to engage. Others who are asking the same questions, like myself and a lot of you lot, found some truth in those answers and came together. The Zeitgeist Movement is linking identity, adversary and goal together in a way that creates a new master frame. That is to say, the values and beliefs pervade do not align under the existing cultural norm or mainstream. A master frame can be seen as a complete way of seeing the world. The zeitgeist, i.e. not the movement, the cultural norm, being the dominant form. Yeah, there you go. We are not single-issue activists. We are not a single-issue activist cause that sits within the existing dominant collective frame of reference. It is primarily the creation of a new master frame, albeit only shared by a minority. Since I've joined the movement, I've seen my whole world change. My entire understanding of what is wrong with the world and what needs to be done has changed. Finding out how money works, where it really came from, who's printing it, who's controlling it, just how much it divides us, were at first new territory. It was the elephant in the room, but something my existing frame had not enabled me to see. Only by having an open mind can we move to something new. An open mind enables learning, and importantly, real growth. By being here, primarily, you are engaging in a new frame of reference, a new way of understanding the world. Something you see in the Zeitgeist Movement, I presume, makes sense to you. Not all of it, perhaps. Of course you have questions and reservations, I do still. But here that's a good thing, and to an extent proves the point. You are here seeking a new frame of reference or a new understanding to the questions you have. Something is connecting with you, giving you some answers. Maybe not all, but some. Put your hand up if this is the case. Everyone, okay. This movement is about you people, all of us. It is about getting people to understand and share a valid frame of reference. The Zeitgeist Movement, besides being a name, is something that occurs. It is about the spread of an idea through you and everyone to eventually take its place in the dominant culture of the time. This is how we can understand our growth. This is what is happening. People are here because they identify with our collective frame, the articulated values and beliefs. More specifically, the aforementioned tension of frame is resolved. This is not to say that the world becomes a happier place, but it means that the things we experience in life are congruent to what we know about life, no matter how ugly the picture. This is what is causing our growth. Quite simply, if people didn't, we wouldn't grow. We have grown, so people are. Quite a few, in fact, it seems. From where I stand, this room, it looks anything but empty. Maybe if you're asleep, but... So for the last 10 minutes or so, here are two things to further focus on the sharing of frames, or activism. Because there are a lot of frames out there. People need help choosing, and some people need to know they have a choice. How do we get people to choose a better frame? What can you activists be doing? I'm going to share with you some things I've found to work well that are covered in research. And remember, this can be used whether talking to one person, or designing activist events, producing products such as leaflets or films, planning resource-based dinner parties, or whatever it is that gets you folks going. Does that sound relevant? No? Shit. Bug this. Just say yes anyway. It makes me feel good and stop stammering as much. Frame analysis. Let's stick with science then. These are two elements of frame analysis that are used with the direct purpose of understanding how social movements grow. I have adapted it for presentation's sake. If anybody wants the actual journals or references for the materials used, I'm happy to provide it. Frame validity is about the integrity of the frame. Hence, as activists, this is essentially about you going out there and checking that people's frames work, giving them a nice shiny new pair if theirs are broken. Now, this isn't about you going out there and saying that you know best, that your frame is the right frame. Check it out, it's amazing. This inevitably results in disagreements. This is about science, and it is about using science as a third person, a neutral party. It is something we can use to understand and identify a common ground. Also, it takes the I out of the argument, the me versus you. It is a method, not a person. And on many levels, we've all been using it for many years. We just don't give it the credit it is due, or for that fact, the responsibility it can handle. As Jack Fresco implies, science is the closer approximation to the way the world really works. It is telling the truth. Science doesn't try to get along with people, it tells them what their findings are. Although at first the Zeitgeist Movement and Venus Project presented as new to me, in time I came to see that it was not entirely. The application of science for social concern is something that has been in the making for hundreds of years. For me, this is a modern day re-emergence of an Enlightenment movement. This is an ongoing struggle. There have been many attempts throughout these years. Hopefully this time we will succeed. It has at its core the notion that no longer do we need to be guessing and making things up, or doing things according to one particular person or group's frame. We have science as a means to find out what is, and hence to arrive at decisions instead of making them. Okay, that should have come up last time. Today, we must renew the tradition that emerged in the 19th century in the scientific field, says Bourdieu, which refuses to leave the world to the blind forces of economics and seeks to extend to the entire social world the values of the scientific universe. Bourdieu is talking about monetary economics here, for him in particular neoliberal forms. Of course, Bourdieu doesn't extend to the removal of money as a root cause, but he does make some good points. Wilkinson refers to him heavily in the spirit level. He also highlights something that needs to occur in order for social movements to really have an impact. Remembering the initial notion of collective action and frames being a means to organise collective experience, Bourdieu speaks of releasing the energy stored within the scientific city. By this he means science is held behind closed doors. It is restricted in its application, drawn on by politicians when it suits them, ignored when it does not. This is true of all self-referential belief systems. This containment needs to stop. As a species, we are denying ourselves the full support of our closest ally, science. We must work together to design new forms of organisation, capable of bringing together researchers and activists in a work of collective critique and proposition, leading to novel forms of mobilisation and action. Social movements, in particular ones in a global era, have often been criticised. Their frame of reference has been challenged. For example, they have often been called ignorant protectionists who offer no alternatives and are unworthy of serious attention. Sorry. Remember, identity, adversary, goal. Movements have often been seen to lack any viable goal or alternative, in addition to subjective definitions of a problem. This is not the case with us, nor must it be able to. As activists, we need to combine our principles and actions with research, the use of evidence. This is about protest adopting a valid frame with regards to an identity, adversary, goal. Again, this is what is causing our growth. It must be a frame that can be challenged, tested for falsification and hence for validity. Falsification just means that other people must be able to conduct the same tests and get the same results. They cannot exist only in the individual's experience. Likewise, something that was once seen to have been proved must stand the test of time. If surpassed, it goes. Simple. As activists, we are seeking to challenge what people believe. In no way do we seek to make everyone the same. But science, as a method, is a way to make sure that what people see, what they believe, and how we collectively organise ourselves is based on what we know, not what we think we know. We can test frames in many ways. When we think about our approach in activism, we need to think about how we can challenge people's values and beliefs. We can ask questions that are designed to highlight flaws, cracks, and gaps in the existing frame. For me, I often find myself asking people, where does money come from? How come some have so much and others have so little? Do they really work that much harder? Who is the Bank of England? What do financiers actually produce that is of value? Why is so much money spent on wars? when it could easily solve all material problems on Earth. It is about taking people to the edge of their frame, about getting them to think outside of the box, to see things that their frame doesn't normally enable them to see, prompt questions that they wouldn't normally ask. On our side is the fact that the world is going to shit. Not that this is a good thing, but as we discussed earlier, people are beginning to ask questions on their own. But also we can help facilitate these questions. As I said, we don't have much time. But nonetheless, once an established world system begins to decompose, social instability moves with chaotic effect. Questions of who we are come to the fore. Now, this can mean the whole world, literally, or it can mean the world of peoples, their individual or collective frames of reference. The only thing that can prevent this is the integrity of the frame, the validity, how well it holds up when it truly gets tested. Frame articulator, frame consistency, and empirical viability are all terms found in the science of frame validity. The better the movements, the more its growth potential. Likewise, the weaker the frame, not necessarily the individuals, but the dominant form that they are found under, or the movements, the more likely holes are to appear, and hence alternative directions sought. It is about what people claim, their statements of truth, and their actions. We can think of the movements frame, the dominant political frame, the individual frame. Peter, or anyone in the movement, has never asked me for anything. All materials produced and information are made available for free. Today has just been about covering expenses. In fact, I know that the creation of the materials for the movement, such as the film, the DVDs given out, the pamphlets, come at considerable cost to the people who produce them. Yet nothing is asked for other than your help. Compare this with other frame articulators who who take so much, yet what is given in return? As activists, we are seeking to challenge people, to show the limits of the existing frame. We are looking to expose weaknesses in the dominant frame of the time, the zeitgeist. We are looking to raise questions about what is possible, I mean really possible. We are looking to promote science as a way to discover this. Okay, let's move on. Number 2, I'm going to talk about frame bridging now. In just a second, anyway. Okay. As we discussed earlier, the construction and maintenance of one's frame happens over the course of a life. During this time, often because of our own experiences, we come to find ourselves sympathising with one particular concern or trouble. For me, it was the struggle and disadvantage of the young people growing up in the poorest sections of society. As we go through this exercise, maybe you could just think about yours in that circle there, maybe the thing that you sympathise with most in society. For me, initially, working with these young people directly was seen as a solution, to try and help them break out of their predicament. I've worked in many places, but predominantly for a charity that housed young homeless people. We would try and support them, work with them to build their independence, and eventually move them on to somewhere better. This was my frame of reference. That was my understanding of the problem. Remember identity, adversary, goal? This was my identification of a problem and my goal, or what I thought should be done. Key elements of frame were missing. Hence, the aforementioned frame tension. Let me just start that bit again. Key elements of frame were missing. Hence, the aforementioned tension earlier. What was causing the problem was absent from my frame. I could talk about my experiences for days. They're truly tragic. But for now, I will have to highlight one thing that I learned. No matter how many homeless young people I truly managed to help, and even admitting it was relatively few, I feel, it never seemed to alter the fact that there was always a queue a queue of young, homeless, neglected and often abused children arriving at the door. It became apparent in time that this approach was purely reactive. That is to say, it was doing nothing for the actual cause of the problem. Furthermore, and what became even more apparent, was that not only was it not addressing the cause, but essentially we relied on these young people to operate as a charity, and thus for our jobs too. On the very few occasions we had empty beds, there was no sigh of relief. There was no notion that the problem was getting any better. Instead, we would go looking for homeless people. Each empty bed was lost revenue, and that just didn't work. One young homeless person is worth around 300, I can't even say it, it's just ridiculous. One young homeless person is worth around £300 a week to the business. Needless to say, I don't work there anymore. With hindsight, I can see how my identification of a problem was there to a degree, but the adversary and goal elements were certainly not in line. The first point I'm trying to make is that focusing on one trouble or concern and working in a reactive capacity does nothing to solve the actual cause of the problem. The trouble also is that if you spend most of your time here, you don't get to see or change the cause. Again, it's something out of frame. And as before, we continue looking for a real solution or a better frame. But we all know this, right? Zeitgeist 101, systems theory. What this does show us, though, and the second point then, is that multiple individual concerns can still be linked to a singular root cause. The root cause is something which can be shared. It is the common ground we are searching for. This is the bridging point. The larger the range of problems covered by a frame, the larger the range of social groups that can be addressed with the frame, and the greater the mobilisation capacity of the frame. If we can locate people's existing concerns and bridge them to a shared causation, then we can gain support via a different way, different to using validity alone, that is. The initial approach here, instead of challenging people, sees time spent finding out what people's issues are, then linking them to a shared cause. We can then explore how this cause affects other areas, such as our own initial concern. The introduction of a solution, or the introduction of the movement frame per se, comes later. Once the existing frame has been expanded or compromised, if people discover a new element to their concern, a new understanding of cause, then it is likely they will be more open to a new understanding of solution. This changes the nature of activism from that of a single issue responsive approach to a multi-issue systems approach. It is linked together by a common cause and solution. Remember, identity, adversary, goal. It is about finding an entry point and widening the frame. I now find myself not solely concerned for young homeless people, but for anyone that suffers as a result of the same cause. We are multi-issue activists, and the goal here is to link things together, building bridges to the minds of all the peoples. This is utilising systems theory and activism. It is linking the wider understanding, not just focusing on what is impulsive, obvious or right in front of you. It is about taking the individual's concern and linking and bridging it from a shared causation to the wider issue. Just to clarify my point, and this is kind of how I see it in my head, not blank, but sometimes. Does anybody remember the game mole whacking? Does anyone remember that when they all, here you go, I'll show you a picture. You know, they all pop up and you stand there trying to hit them down. Do you remember that? Yeah, cool. It's a little bit like this. There are lots of people whacking moles today, as I did in my youth work. People are reacting and they're trying to keep things at bay. With bridging, we are looking to find people who are mole whacking, to empathise with them. Indeed, perhaps tell them about our own irritating mole. But then we seek to find a shared cause, a common enemy. A massive oversimplification, but to be honest, that's how I think about it. The other diagram all gets a bit complicated. Mole whack or pull the plug and spend our lives doing something more fulfilling together. As with the mole-whacking example, bridging is also the way that you do it. The language, the way you present and relate ideas to people. It's the translation of the idea into a language people understand. We heard earlier from Vixie and the linguistics team, highlighting the work that they do to translate the materials into different languages. But what I'm getting at is that we all need to be doing this into the language of our everyday lives. The films, each DVD, pamphlet, this presentation, any piece of material, will remain in the original format and appearance it was created. They can only hope to connect with people's frames as they are. You, as living beings, as individuals, you have the ability to frame on demand, so to speak, making it relevant to their values and belief, and most importantly, their experience in life. The film, for me, has much more frame resonance and bridging capacities of its own. The sections on childhood are something which we can all relate to. But one thing people often say to me is that the films are quite intense. They're a bit long. Some have said that the books are a bit complicated. Not me, but people do. I know not everyone likes reading. There is often no one set medium that will appeal to everyone you talk to, and that's something we have to respect and work with. A film or book can only ever take its one form. People can misinterpret them, as we all well know. I just want to make one real brief example using some discourse analysis. I was talking to my cousin, Greg, asking if he'd seen the new film yet, and I use this example because this was who introduced me to the movement, but ironically since hasn't really had anything to do with it himself since. This was via text. I've copied it directly, so if there's any bad language, it's Greg's fault. I said, "Oh, twat, have you seen the new Zeitgeist film yet?" To which my cousin responded, "I will get round to it. Started it already, but had to stop after 20 minutes. A bit intense." And I said, as you would, "But it's an intense subject." Greg replied, "I just think they need to adapt it so that the plebs can understand it." It is an intense subject, but people need to be able to relate to it. I have to stress here that with plebs, he's talking about himself. That's how my cuz talks. He's hitting at the notion that for a lot of people, including himself clearly, that the film on its own doesn't hold their attention. Someone asked a question about this yesterday in the Q&A. As in the example with my cousin, we can see two things. For him, the concept, the idea, hasn't been made directly relevant to his life. His lack of urgency when he says, "we'll get round to it," denotes that value-wise, it's not a priority. Also, the format, described as a bit intense, shows that for him, a different language is required. Clearly more work is required there. He did do a political degree, though, and he's not the sharpest tool in the shed. But he is watching this, so, yeah. Hi, cuz. Great, now he'll think you're all laughing at him. Yeah. As I have conveyed, hopefully, the idea needs to be put into a language he understands, in a format he can engage with, something he understands and experiences in his own life. Resource-based economy, innit, cuz? As bridging activists, we have to become the mass translators, the mass of frame articulators, finding people's concerns, identifying, sharing, and then working to find common goals. So on that note, I'm going to have to stop and try and just sum up things for a moment. If people want me to produce anything more, just let me know and I'll make some videos on my own somewhere. So to summarise and to try and highlight what to do now. First, remember, we are all oh, crikey, I've gone too fast. Hang on a minute. I've just ruined my end. How bad's that? Okay, first, remember, just to run through it, that we are all activists. Whatever you do, do it with purpose. There was a question asked yesterday, and it was quite a good one, and it just said that they were too busy, you know, they had a job and kids and whatnot, and they didn't have time to do activism. What I'm trying to get in there is you don't have to go and do something separate. Whatever it is that you do anyway as part of your life, just do it with purpose. Do it with the purpose of conveying this idea to other people, whether that's people you spend at work or children that you spend time with. I don't really know what happens in your lives, but just work it into whatever you're doing already. Activism is lots of people talking to lots of people. It is about the communication of an idea. The reason why we have grown is you. It's all of us. Efforts, big and small, add up. You can clap for yourselves again there, it's you. Give yourselves a little... This is your life. Take the idea and translate it. Present it to people in your life, in the language they speak, relating it to things they experience and know. The tools for activism we focused on were frame validity and frame bridging. The final thought I wish to leave you with is a question regarding validity and bridging. The two concepts are in no way exclusive. They operate in a very fluid way, and both will inevitably be required in pursuit of our goal. When looked at alone, validity, the challenging of frames, the searching for flaws and inconsistencies, is an abrasive and often uncomfortable way to communicate with people. Validity, if reduced, is about getting people to change. It is inevitably about showing them that their frame is wrong and that the frame tested by science is better. This approach alone, or if relied on too heavily, will often lead to people being defensive or a closing of the mind. People who have their frames a long time, most often they're given by and in line with their families, the people they care about most. People will defend this no matter what the evidence says. Frame bridging, on the other hand, is about looking for things we have in common. It is about taking time to understand someone's frame, about finding what matters most to them. Then it is about finding what we can do to help each other. Frame validity is about asking someone to change. Bridging is about asking someone for help. I don't doubt that both are involved, but think about the order and the balance to which you use them. People's frames are precious to them. Indeed, they are their very worlds, as are yours for you. As activists, we cannot just run out and seek to tear people's existing worlds away, replacing it with something we see as better. We need to take time to understand their world, their frame, their values and beliefs. We need to speak in their language, for only then can we find the true meanings we share and the real cause of our problems, and the real solution to them and how to work together to do that. Well, I'll put that fade on way too slow.